Bienvenue, bonjour, bienvenue donc, à cette quatrième et dernière session du colloque Claim, Récits d'artistes femmes africaines. Tout d'abord, je tiens à remercier et à féliciter très chaleureusement Claire Barbillon, directrice de l'école du Louvre, Camille Morino, directrice et cofondatrice d'AWARE, Ngo Nefal, brillante commissaire générale de la Saison Africa2020, le comité scientifique, bien sûr, de ce colloque, Anaïs Roche et toute l'équipe d'AWARE, de nous offrir une plateforme exceptionnelle depuis ces derniers jours d'échanges et de réflexion d'une si grande qualité et d'une si grande richesse. Bien sûr, je remercie tout particulièrement tous les panélistes qui, depuis donc mardi, partagent avec nous leur travail remarquable, leur réflexion, et je les remercie surtout pour la générosité des échanges engagés. C'est un réel plaisir et un honneur que de participer à ce colloque, de présider la session d'aujourd'hui. Je me présente rapidement. Je suis donc Sonia Recassens, critique d'art, commissaire d'exposition indépendante basée à Paris. Depuis une dizaine d'années, mes recherches, écrits et expositions tendent à analyser, questionner et subvertir le manque de visibilité des artistes femmes, des artistes afro-descendants, des artistes africains et du monde arabe sur la scène artistique française en particulier, puisque c'est là où j'opère. Donc, je suis très heureuse de modérer la session d'aujourd'hui consacrée aux récits institutionnels avec les artistes et chercheurs que sont Alice Corcor Ebeheke, Dorothy Akpene-Amenuke, Bernard Akoye-Jackson, Perrine Laytrop, Amandine Nana et enfin notre keynote speaker Karen Milbourne. Donc, je suis particulièrement heureuse de la problématique de cette session parce que j'avoue être un peu hantée depuis 2 ans, je dirais, par l'analyse de Linda Nochlin dans son essai fondateur, publié en 1971, « Pourquoi n'y a-t-il pas eu de grandes artistes femmes ?» Donc, dans son essai, l'historienne de l'art analyse le discours sexué qui se cache derrière la notion de grande artiste ou de génie et révèle les mécanismes institutionnels mis en place pour tenir les femmes à l'écart du champ de la création artistique. Mais ce que l'on oublie souvent, c'est que la conclusion de Linda Nochlin dans son essai, c'est que finalement, l'enjeu majeur du féminisme en histoire de l'art ne consiste pas tant dans la réhabilitation des artistes femmes oubliées que dans la déconstruction du mythe du grand artiste et donc dans la déconstruction des mécanismes institutionnels de discrimination genrée, raciale, sexuelle, qu'ils soient conscients ou inconscients. Et je l'ai particulièrement compris en réalisant la rétrospective de l'artiste franco-jamaïcaine Essie aux abattoirs de Toulouse en 2017, puis au Mussac de Léon en 2018. Mon ambition était naïvement de réhabiliter une artiste invisibilisée, tombée dans l'oubli, une artiste très active dans les années 70 et qui a par exemple bénéficié d'une exposition monographique au Musée d'art moderne de la ville de Paris en 1975, pour ensuite peu à peu disparaître de la scène artistique dès les années 80. Donc ma première frustration a été de constater que cette revalorisation des vieilles maîtresses, si l'on peut dire, faisait d'abord le bonheur du marché de l'art et des galeristes en particulier. Deuxièmement, le milieu de l'art et les institutions au lieu de procéder à un autodiagnostic et d'assumer leur part de responsabilité dans ce processus d'invisibilisation, étaient plus enclins à présenter Essie comme la pauvre victime de son mari, le peintre d'ado, donc qui était un artiste de grande renommée et qui est présent dans de très nombreuses collections publiques et privées en Europe et à l'international. Donc plutôt que de se demander pourquoi les commissaires, les conservateurs, les galeristes, les critiques, les collectionneurs ont cessé dès les années 80 de regarder, d'exposer, d'acheter ou d'écrire sur l'œuvre de Essie, comme beaucoup d'autres artistes femmes à l'époque, on préfère faire porter le chapeau au mari, qui a bon dos, puisqu'il n'est plus là pour se défendre. On accuse donc le patriarcat domestique pour finalement ne pas questionner, pour ne pas remettre en question le sexisme et le racisme institutionnel. Je suis donc absolument ravie d'avoir l'opportunité de découvrir les recherches et les réflexions des intervenants de cet après-midi pour questionner ensemble donc, le rôle que les institutions ont joué dans la sous-représentation durable des femmes dans l'art, la responsabilité que les institutions doivent assumer à l'avenir dans la création de systèmes de représentation plus équitables, et enfin réfléchir et imaginer ensemble des modèles alternatifs qui seraient plus inclusifs. Donc, je vais sans plus tarder accueillir et vous présenter la première intervention proposée par Alice Korkor-Ebereke. Docteur Alice Korkor-Ebereke est africaniste, artiste, critique d'art, chercheuse et chargée de cours à l'Université des sciences et technologies Kwame Nkrumah. Ses travaux et recherches explorent les réponses possibles aux problèmes auxquels les sociétés contemporaines sont confrontées, notamment dans les anciennes pensées épistémologiques, les arts et les théories de l'Afrique. Ces études s'articulent autour du Sankofa, une philosophie de la société à Cannes du Ghana. Ces champs de recherche incluent l'art africain contemporain, l'art et la culture de la diaspora africaine, les études culturelles, ethnographiques et autochtones et les études ethniques africaines. Son ambition est d'utiliser ces recherches pour présenter des idéologies qui traitent d'une unification des pensées pour parvenir à une compréhension amalgamée de l'Afrique. Pour son intervention intitulée « Rupture des frontières et des limites », détruire les stéréotypes en se servant des stéréotypes, le cas de l'art contemporain. Elle sera accompagnée de l'artiste Dorothy Akpene-Amenuke et de l'artiste chercheur-auteur Bernard Akoy Jackson. Je vous laisse la parole avec grand plaisir.
Okay, so as she rightly said, we are three artist academics who work in Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and we all reside in Kumasi. So through our presentation, we would try to answer the questions that the symposium poses that has to do with an underrepresentation of women artists, responsibility of institutions in creating equitable systems of representation, and then alternative and inclusive institutional models. And we do this by focusing on contemporary African arts practitioners who have continually pushed for the rescinding of notions of boundaries that confine artists or that have confined artists into what we term as an esoteric ethos, where we have the one tribe, one art form coming in. And then we observe contemporary women artists whose practices problematize Africanity and challenge some of these stereotypical ideas about women in art, about Africa, and then about arts in general. Contemporary African art from Africa and the African diaspora has become a force to be reckoned with in the international art circuits. And this is due to the efforts of some formidable arts practitioners who we see as predominantly women. And these women have been on the forefront challenging certain colonially ascribed positions on arts that comes from the continent. And they do this by questioning either subtly or boldly the colonialist projects. And we consider art practitioners through their techniques, medium, and institutional presence, and who through this challenge these cliched ideas and stereotypical ideologies about African arts, about gender specificity of media, and then the ghettoization of arts as coming from Africa. So when we say breaking boundaries and borders, what we mean actually is that to break a boundary, it would take some form of tests, some form of measurements, and some willingness to work with, to go beyond the odds that society sets for you. And normally, to be able to break these boundaries, you need to work with unlikely entities that often materialize themselves as stereotypes. And the need for breaking this boundary is to actually question the tainted historiography or the dominant narratives about arts in Africa. And when we consider Valerie Smith's work, Abundant Evidence, Black women artists of the 1960s and 70s, she outlines that during this period when young artists were on the rise, and among whom were women, their main aim were to challenge conventional distinctions in order to reach a mass audience. Looking at the ensuing conversations, we consider from Aikwe Ame's perspective that one of the most dangerous boundaries that have been set for Africans are those that colonialism, through the pursuit of so-called enlightenment, inflicted on the African continent. And these boundaries we see come in two major forms, that is the literal boundary and the psychological boundary. And via the single act of transgression, with reference to the Berlin Conference of 84 to 85, Euro-American cartographers came in and mapped out the African continent, saying these people belong here and these belong here. And it sort of initiated an atomization of the African people. And when the African colonies began gaining their independence in the late 1950s and 60s throughout the 70s, it was the hope of the people that their leaders were going to pursue African excellence via self-reliance and a collectivization of the African experience, but this did not happen. In Ghana, Nigeria, and Uganda, and even as far as India, where we see the colonial experience to be somewhat synonymous. When the first art schools were established by the British colonial government, they sought to train artists with a so-called hand and eye training. And they were oblivious to the fact that the African artist was already producing art using certain peculiar techniques that were unknown to them, the British. Because of this, there has been a great dent, because of their involvement in the training of artists, there has been a great dent in the institution of art and its incorporation into the formal educational system all across of Africa. So towards remedying these blighted institutional conditions, we projects such as BC Silver's CCA Lagos and the Asiko Art School project would emerge. And this attitude, coupled with efforts of other arts practitioners, bring attention to institutions and practices within the continent and the diaspora. At this point, we would like to observe a moment's silence in memory of Olabisi Obafunke Silva. Thank you for that. BC was a Nigerian independent curator. She was the founder of Contemporary Art, Center for Contemporary Art Lagos, that's CCA Lagos, which was opened in December 2007. She was also the founder of Fourth Dial Arts, which was a non-profit project in London, based in London, dedicated to promoting and cultivating cultural practice in visual arts. And then she also founded the Asiko Art School project. So in her practice and her setup of these foundations and institutions, she has successfully aided in the promotion of contemporary artists, both young and old, and representing and presenting them to the international art world. She has advocated through her institution for the preservation of the art of Africa in Africa, And in this, we see her quotes that says, quote, 10 years ago, most African curators and artists were going to Europe or America to see what was happening. There is now more of an imperative to engage within the continent, to not always be looking northbound. TCA boasts of a gallery space and a library and an archive where exhibitions are organized and held. And Silva has also been very instrumental in organizing and interacting with arts practitioners who employ vast medium in engaging conversations and discussions. She was, as part of her legacy, we see texts, books, documents, publications, and these are things that practitioners are hoping to look up to for the future of contemporary African art. She was also instrumental in the success of the ArtX project, which was a collaborative work with Tokini Peterside, which sought to engage artists and other arts practitioners to widen Nigerians' connection to the art world. Again, she was involved in the works of other arts practitioners in West Africa, not only in Nigeria. And here we see her with some alumni of the Asiko Art School project visit the Orderly Disorderly exhibition that was organized by the Department of Painting and Sculpture of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in the Museum of Science and Technology in Accra. So after this, we present a cross-generational selection of women contemporary practitioners, whose approach to material medium technique have continually challenged conventional notions. We begin with what we continue with Esther Malangu, who is a South African artist from the Ndebele nation. And she's known for her large-scale paintings and murals. And her technique was one that was taught her by her mother and grandmother as part of her upbringing, since it followed in the tradition of the Ndebele females to learn to paint exteriors of their houses. So her technique spans from exterior of houses to large-scale murals, which is an example of what we see here. And this was commissioned by the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. It was actually one of two to flank the entryway of the Evans Court, which is the entrance to the museum's African collection. This is actually a clear example of the involvement of museums as institutions in representing women artists from Africa. Malangu's works exude precision, accuracy, abstraction, and vigor, and her choices of colors are often bold. And for example, in her case, she also immerses herself in the stereotypical identification of herself as a tribal artist, and then pushes through this initially indigenous practice to the extremes of contemporaneity, in most ways exceeding expectations. This can clearly be seen in her painting of the tail of the British Airways airplane, where you see a transition or a movement between her paintings of exterior of houses to her large-scale murals, to the painting of the British Airways tailplane in 1997, to the painting of the Benz, the Fiat automobile, and her most recent work, Malangu's Rolls-Royce Phantom 2020. Our next artist is Felicia Aban, and she's one who we see to have suffered a great deal because of the typical classification of profession based on both the literal and the psychological boundaries that were placed on women. And at the height of her career, there were actually no female photographers in Ghana. And she was even considered as the first one to set up a photographic studio in Jamestown in Accra. And she was also said to be one of the official photographers of Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president. So a lot of the images that we see of him today, we all part to Felicia Aban. Through her studio portraits, Aban has been able to project the indigenous culture of the people And she does this by staging with her patrons to project this. But aside that, she also looks at, she also blends it with modernity in most of her self-portraits. And this we see on the, at the Venice, this was exhibited at the Venice Biennale in 2019, which was basically the first time that she was actually given reverence or credence as an African artist. Next, we consider Dorothy Akwene Amenuke, who we have a privilege of being a part of us. And she is a Ghanaian artist and academic who currently resides and practices her art in Kumasi. She considers herself a sculptor, but she manipulates fibers and fabrics into special installations and objects. And she often evokes feelings of containment and questions boundaries and space. So her work, Habitation in Habitation, for example, that was exhibited at the Nubuke Foundation, explores this. And she makes use of stitching, tying, gluing, joining, among other techniques to explore themes of quotidian tasks, women, arts, and metaphors. And in her questioning of spaces, boundaries, confinement, and containment, a lot of her works have been led to be exhibited in the natural environment, and not only looking at the space for the exhibition, but the reason for breaking out of the conventional institution. And we see here Avakalevivi Menya and the Palace that are that have both been exhibited in the natural environment. This work, How Far, How Near, actually provokes the feelings or challenges the issues related to identity, where and then she questions institutional involvement. And so you see it's available in the collection of the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. And it's an art that can be viewed from the front and from behind. Our next artist is Nena Okori, who is a Nigerian artist based in Nigeria, who works in Nigeria and in the US. And she's also known for her largely abstracted sculptures that are inspired by textures, colors, and forms within her social surroundings. And we see her influential position as a professor of art in the North Park University as allowing her to be able to directly impact the lives of art practitioners. And she represents her dual identity in almost all of her art. Some of her earlier works, such as the Agbogo variants we see here and Aqua Ocha, actually explore the use of clay among other materials that clay predominantly that has been abundant in Iberi and Uburu in Ikuano in Abia State in Nigeria, where she was born. In her second solo exhibition, Twist and Turns, Nena illuminates the sense of dynamism and movement by exploring materials through laborious processes that were garnered from her West African experience. Going back to her work, Aqua Ocha, which is a sculpture that is made up of long white rectangular clay cubes covering a surface, she explores the institution of marriage, sanctity, virginity, and purity. And she explains the importance of the ceremony as a representation of unity that brings people together. But in our deliberations, we also considered the cross-cultural extension of marriage in the Western world, talking about the white wedding and how it's infiltrated into the indigenous African milieu, where the psychological effects of the institution of marriage is evident in the sense that even now, when people go in for the traditional marriage, they feel there's the need for the white wedding, which is a colonially constructed notion that this somewhat defines the sanctity of marriage. We then move on to Mary Sibande, who's a South African artist residing in Johannesburg. And her art usually consists of designs, paintings, photographs, and sculptures. Her work is mainly based on her own personal experiences. and an exploration of the human form through construction of identity in post-colonial South Africa. And she alludes to the fact that her art actually critiques stereotypical depictions of Black women and undoes this stereotype by maintaining the color Black as the skin for her works. And she does this by engaging in argumentative titles and narratives. And we see a lot of her works with her alter ego called Sophie. So Sibande sees herself as looking into the world, or as experiencing the world, as experiencing fantasies through the eyes of Sophie that are always closed. And for this work, A Terrible Beauty is Born, that was exhibited as part of the Purple Shall Govern, which was a slogan from the liberation movement's wordplay on the people shall govern. And she shows herself in purple clothing, but with an apron and a scarf falling off of her body, and revealing herself in dignity and creativity that have only been made possible after apartheid. Also, in our interaction with this piece, we realized that it lends credence to the proliferation of perceived and so-called education and the role that educational institutions and others have played in oppressing the mind of the Black woman into thinking that her space existed in a particular room. And in fact, going back to Valerie Smith's work, Abundant Evidence, K. Brown said that during the 1960s and the 1970s, when young women artists were on the rise, they were conditioned to think that they could actually not achieve statuses of professional artists. And this work of Sibande brings us into a solemn state where we sit and ponder and then consider what is expected of us and what we should do to go beyond that expectation. She finds inspiration from her personal stories, as we said earlier, and she finds a link also between historical narratives and those from her life. And in this piece, we see this piece titled Conversation with Madam C.J. Walker. Madam C.J. Walker is an Afro-American entrepreneur. And also with our interpretation or with our interaction with this piece, we felt that it projected the initiation of institution as an entrepreneurship. And it was educating the young artists to do more than what our very boundaries allow us to do. In this piece also, this is the Domba dance that is available at the Kavi Gupta booth. This piece, we are not going to go much into detail, but we are considering the boldness that Sibande uses in her work, her color, the color symbolism that she employs in her work. And then we also consider the overall experience that one gets when interacting with this piece. Our next artist is Nandipa Ntambo. And she is also a South African artist who employs different art forms. She is a mixed media artist, and she is known for her cowhide sculptures. She also explores elements of identity and the relationship between the politics of representation and self-representation. And in her focus on the human body, she explores the nature of identity using natural materials with sculpture, video, and photography. And her use of cowhide and her own body as a model sort of wigwags between the living and the dead, the bound and unbound, animal and human, attraction and repulsion. And her boneless sculptures triggered us into thinking of ways of breaking out of a shell. So we look at the skin that used to contain an animal as the boundary, and then the launching of a new life into it. That's the female form that is covered with the cowhide, and then a combination, a unification of the two. That is the questioning of perceived notions of beauty and acceptance. And then in our case, the challenging of the postulations that we have been taught through colonial wiring to accept as true. So taking the guise of a bull, Ntambo uses her body as a foundation, but references the male and female, the traditional bronze casting of the Renaissance period. And she uses this to challenge the male and female roles within society. And we actually owe the caption, the title for our intervention to the discussions we had on Ntambo, because she was one of the first artists that we considered. And this dauntless expression is seen in most of her works. And an example is, well, for the lack of time, we may not be able to show this video, but this is a video titled Upungenisa, and it was done in 2009, where she rehearses the steps of a matador in an arena where Black Mozambicans would fight for the entertainment of their Portuguese colonial masters. And she's seen in an atypical act where there is an unseen bull, and then she places herself in the duality of the context by dressing up as both the matador and the bull, which is represented by her adornment of the cowhide outfit. And then the arena that was once a public space is now a lonely space that is housing this presentation. And here, like her depictions in cowhide, she explores fear and fearlessness, masculinity and femininity, animal and human, aggression and defense. And we, as 3 points, we look at the bordered space as one that confined people and wired them to think that they needed to fight to survive. And then we look at the absence of the people in the very space as the defeat of the very walls that bound them. In this chromogenic print, we see Ntambo again disguised as a bull, kneeling over her nubile self, and she merges Picasso's Minotaur kneeling over sleeping girl and Tiziano Vecellio's The Rib of Europa to create her own Black historical mythology, and in this case, boldly challenging historical and archival narratives. Through the significant curatorial work of the likes of B.C. Silva, as we've mentioned before, the indefatigable Ngoni Fao, through whose collaborative efforts this conference and the entire African Season 2020 project has materialized. Thank you. And Koyo Kuyo, who through her founding and her founding of the running of the raw material company in Senegal, and her recent appointment as director of the Zaid Smoker in Cape Town. Contemporary artists in Africa and its diasporas have occupied formidable places in the arts world, or places in the arts discourse. And in recent years, we see 154 Contemporary African Art Fair that was initiated by Touria El Glawi as a platform to assist in the projection of contemporary African arts practices. And she's actually the last arts practitioner that we focus on. And she is the founding director of the 154 Contemporary African Arts Fair, 154 being one continent, 54 countries. And this art fair has improved the representation of contemporary African arts in worldwide exhibitions. And the platform is seen as a highlight that allowed artists from all over Africa to showcase their works, irrespective of gender or tribal orientation, which were some restrictions that some institutions put on artists. And in fact, El Glawi's establishments can be seen as the way forward in an attempt to answer the question of alternative and inclusive institutional models. And 154 has become the booming sound in the silence of the arts practice of non-Western artists. And during this fair, the works of at least 130 artists have been showcased and exhibited in about 27 galleries. And we see involvements of Koyo Kuyo, Maimuna, Omar Victor Diop, Tracy Rose, Billy Zangewa, among others. So in conclusion, all the practitioners that we have mentioned in this intervention show a certain tendency towards Pan-Africanism and an openness to the larger art world conceptually and aesthetically. And we see Esther Malango, who pushes an initially indigenous practice to the extremes of contemporaneity, thus challenging these technical and visual stereotypes. We see Felicia Aban, who jumps onto the stage of photography and rubs shoulders squarely with male practitioners. And then Dorothy Akwene Amenuke and Nnena Okori, who engage so-called feminine techniques of weaving and stitching and the manipulation of fibers and fabrics to expand the possibilities of sculpture. And then Nandipan Tambo and Mary Sibande also activate the body of the woman and determinants of the conventional expectations of the body. And then BC Silva, Ngoni Fall, Koyo Kuyo, and Turia El-Glawi all focus on making the contemporary art of Africa and its diaspora more visible in institutions across the world. So the arts practitioners who we have looked at, their works actually speak for themselves in the institutions where they find themselves, and by so doing, they tend to shake up these institutions by being in their spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. Pardon, je parle du coup en anglais par automatisme. Merci infiniment pour cette présentation, voilà, absolument passionnante et intéressante, et qui permet aussi de rappeler, de découvrir des artistes, des commissaires d'exposition qui œuvrent aussi à rendre plus visible et à changer le discours et le regard sur l'art des artistes femmes africaines. Nous avons déjà quelques questions, et donc qui s'adressent à la première présentation, à Alice. Mais du coup, Bernard et Dorothy pourront également participer aux réponses. Donc, c'est Stacy Kennedy qui demande: How do you account for the prominence of women curators and arts administrators in the contemporary African art world? BC, Koyo, and Gone. Why do women lead the field?
Okay.
Should I? Okay, I'll begin. Just thank you for thank you for the question. Thank you also for your presentations. Interesting crossovers and links from the very first day till today. Perrine, also nice to see you. We just were excited. Kwesi and I are here, and we are excited about the project. We just go straight to the point. Why are there many women in the African scene? What we'll ask is, why not? I think this was the need even much longer ago. Now, a lot of people critique the scene that it's male dominated, but we should also know what would have really instituted this male domination. The colonial educational system had already established this way of stratifying the society. When you consider Ghanaian society, for instance, in let's say Akan society, women are very prominent. Women are kings, or I mean, literally, women rule places, and the counsel of a woman is very considered. And so it is very weird that with the colonialist encounter, suddenly African society had to reconsider itself, and the male position became overemphasized. It is not necessarily the case. So it is true that there are many women in the contemporary African art scene, and we are very happy that that happens. For instance, with the work of BC that we said, BC was very, I mean, I experienced BC Silva a lot, and she was she was motherly at the same time that she was very critical. And so this is a position that they bring. Ngoni also is fighting you, she's pushing you. It's not, they are not, yeah, and so they have this firmness that is also impartial. And so Koyo also is a no-nonsense woman. They are all very firm. So it's not, it is these qualities that I think are encouraged, and we are glad that they are the ones leading the conversation in Africa.
Then again, to add to that, I think during my presentation, I said that with relation to Valerie Smith's work, that Kay Brown said they were conditioned to think that they couldn't progress as artists in, let's say, a male-dominated art field. But irrespective of that, I think women artists have been able to rise over all those forced ideologies on them, and it has made them dominate in a male predominant field.
Well, I think most of the things have been said. Most of the things have been said by Bernard and Coco, but I still think that although the women are really very strong with our traditional lives, because of this colonialist and domination and ideas that have been pushed on them, and many are working, they are really working, but are not open on the scene. So many of these discussions bring them to light. So traditionally, women are really very strong and forthcoming, and in their works, they show it. That's a little I'll add to.
A quick one, Dorothy, maybe you can also, your position as the only woman faculty on the Department of Painting and Sculpture.
Yeah, maybe I thought you would mention that, but I would also like to say that in the history of the KNUST, in the fine art department, I'm the first lady, the first woman artist and faculty in the history of the university, you know, and I've been here the past 12 years and no lady has come on board. There was no lady before me. And so the issue, it's a bit dicey. We are saying that there are women out there, but then on the other hand, other areas and other disciplines and other administrative faculties still have issues with this woman being capable. And so we still need to have this kind of symposium to bring these women out to light, because we know they are out there.
Alors, il y a Karen Milbourne qui demande si elle peut faire un commentaire. Donc, the current issue of African Art Journal focuses on how women, including BC and Ngone, maybe you want to, yes, Karen, you can.
Sorry. No, I was just going to share with folks that the current issue of African Arts magazine is actually focused on the contemporary art world, Africa, and the women who have brought about change. And it includes actually the last interview with BC Silva, as well as the focus on Ngone Fall. And that was actually an interview with Ntombela Mbek. Thank you. I wasn't planning to speak yet. But I mean, for people who are interested, it looks specifically at this topic of, you know, how women have been positioned somewhat, you know, or not somewhat, on the outside of the contemporary art world, outside these rules. And so they saw what the rules were that were making the system operate as it did, and then set out to change it. And so this just focuses on 12 women who did that, which is by no means all, but it helps sort of see some of this history and how these women have really been game changers.
Et je me permets juste d'ajouter, parce que je pense à une un commentaire en fait de Lucie Lippard sur la proéminence en fait de femmes commissaires d'exposition, critiques. Et en fait, Lucie Lippard disait qu'il était plus facile finalement pour les femmes d'occuper ces postes de second plan que d'être artiste, qui est une place de premier plan. Et commissaire d'exposition, curating, ça vient de care, et a priori, les femmes seraient plus naturellement portées sur le soin aux artistes et à la scène artistique. Donc, ça me fait voilà, penser à ça et me dire que finalement, c'est voilà, aussi un point qui est assez universel. Donc, une question de Lanissa Kitchener. What does it mean that many of the Black women practitioners that has been discussed, B.C. Silva and Gonifal and Koyo, for example, all worked independently and built a measure of renown before gaining entry to and receiving recognition from Western-centered, art-centered establishments? While independent work can afford greater diversity of thought and style, it can also limit reach and access. Should not institutions make more space to bring in more diverse perspectives earlier and more often? What are the real pathways for Black women practitioners to authentically enter into and remain within mainstream art institutions as critics, creators, and artists today?
I would like to jump at that. I think for the impact to also be respected, they had to have developed their own independent practices. And so for people like Koyo, for people like Ngone, for someone like Bisi, it is this independence that actually pushed them. And I think their independence, maybe I'll speak about Bisi's especially, was not unawares of what was going on around. So they are very much aware of the work of Okui and Wezo. They are very much aware of what Olu Ogwibe was doing. They are very much aware of what Simon Njami was doing, and even sometimes collaborated or worked together. The fact that Western institutions or institutions generally need to make more space for women or for even up-and-coming artists and arts practitioners, it's not so much the fault of the practitioners themselves. They are working, we are working hard. It's really the institution that need to re-examine their positions about practitioners. So this is really what, what these three women that we mentioned or more women we mentioned did is that they showed that even if you do not give me support, I will still push hard, and then the institutions will recognize me. So this is what we learn from them, that you keep pushing hard at something until something happens. This is what my take on it. Thank you.
Oui, en effet, c'est aux institutions en fait de changer aussi leur façon de travailler, et je tiens à souligner la vigilance et la pertinence avec laquelle Ngonefal a mené le commissariat de cette saison Africa 2020. Aussi en mettant en relation les institutions françaises avec des commissaires d'exposition, des chercheurs et des critiques africains et de la diaspora. Et ça, je suis persuadée que ça va permettre de changer aussi les façons en fait, de travailler des institutions françaises, de changer la façon en fait, de voir ce type de collaboration. C'est très important. Je voulais juste partager avec vous.
I wanted to speak particularly. Oh. Hello? Oh, sorry.
Yes, no, go on.
I wanted to speak particularly about the media and the techniques, because what our presentation sought to do was to also present practices that obviously challenge this assignment of media to women or men or whatever, because in our larger texts, our larger paper, we also considered men artists who use techniques that you can associate with women. And I mean, prominent amongst them being El Anachi, whose textile-oriented approaches have made his work very significant and relevant in the world. And so we also see that Esther Mahlangu, for instance, when you see her work, you would imagine that it is produced, I mean, if we were to go by the stereotype, that it's produced by a modernist male painter. And yet her work also goes out of the tradition and then pushes modernity and goes beyond. And so these are some of the things we considered. And that even when women like Dorothy Amenuke or Nneka Okori use techniques that would be assigned to women, their work is not necessarily, may speak about women issues, but it's also speaking also about an individual who wants to make a statement in the world. And so these are very deliberate. And I think in current disposition, no media, no medium, no technique can be assigned to any particular gender. It was so, as the question actually said, it was so previously, and that is why it is wrong. I mean, we think it is wrong, and that we need to really critique those positions of the various institutions that read work only through gendered terms. Thank you.
Oui, justement, je voulais partager avec vous en fait un extrait d'un texte du philosophe Paul B. Preciado. Il a écrit dans le catalogue de l'exposition Carole Rama. Et en fait, il écrit « Le discours hégémonique de l'histoire de l'art a été élaboré au moyen de 3 opérations épistémologiques qui s'articulent pour fonder la norme, invisibiliser, découvrir et réduire à une identité. » Et du coup, ma question, c'est comment, parce qu'on est dans ce... Finalement, on opère aussi dans ce processus-là. On est dans ce processus de redécouverte d'artistes qui ont été invisibilisés. Mais comment ne pas tomber dans le piège, justement, de réduire à une identité, à un genre, à un corps, à une origine, à une nationalité, à un pays? Quelles sont vos stratégies pour éviter cet écueil?
Once again, going back to BC, which is actually similar to what we do at Black Star Lines in Kumasi, is to really follow the Pan-Africanist discourse or logic, which was Ngone Fowles also working method, that you do not present things because it's from Senegal or from Ghana, but that it embodies a certain personality, a certain aspiration to progress. And so, for instance, my collective Exit Frame and myself, we have curated together with La Condition Publique in Roubaix an exhibition that shows 14 artists from Africa. And we intentionally chose work that would challenge your thoughts. So it's not, normally it's not the work that you expect to see of African artists, you know what I mean? So you come there with the knowledge that you have, but it also provokes you to question, okay, is this what I know about this space called Africa? What is Africa? Isn't Africa all over the world? Isn't Africa the world? You know, so these are some of the ideas that we are thinking of. If we want to think, then we have to think Pan-Africanist and think actually pan-planetary, I guess, beyond the planets, because we are truly becoming new bodies. Now I do not use my brain to store phone numbers because my phone is doing it for me. So I consider that as an extension of my body. So these are the beings that we are becoming.
Thank you. Alice?
Yeah, I also think that we need to understand that African art has gone beyond the mask, or it has gone beyond, yes, exactly, the painting that shows something realistic. We have to understand the involvement of external characters into the African art scene. So doing that, like Bernard was saying, it challenges your mind on what you expect African art to be. And then again, it makes you, for example, when you look at Mary Sibandi's Domba dance, the kind of energy that you feel when you are looking at it, it's like,
it's connection. I think it's connection issues.
Yes.
So that is more the challenge than...
Alors, c'est une question très compliquée à laquelle à laquelle j'ai l'habitude de me confronter également en tant que commissaire d'exposition, qui travaille principalement avec des artistes afrodescendants ou des diasporas, mais dans le contexte français. Et je dirais que pour en discuter souvent avec les artistes, c'est comment échapper, ne pas les informer dans leur identité, c'est aussi commencer par prendre en compte au début, comme point de départ, leur œuvre, leur production, et renouer peut-être avec un certain formalisme qui a pu être souvent mis de côté, mais trouver, en tout cas même dans l'écriture de la un certain équilibre entre le contexte et également les formes. Donc voilà, et ne pas tomber juste dans un discours sociologique sur leur production, mais essayer de... Voilà, moi, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est dans l'art, c'est ces textures, ces couleurs, ces formes qui naissent, qui émergent de tableaux, de performances, des corps en action, mais et qui peuvent rencontrer, oui, bien sûr, des problématiques dites identitaires, mais qui sont en réalité juste liées au fait que, voilà, c'est ce qu'ils sont. Et la question, c'est que l'on adresse toujours cette question-là identitaire pour des artistes africains, afro-descendants ou autres, mais jamais, en fait, pour des artistes blancs, européens. Donc, voilà.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Une dernière question, mais je pense que ce sera une question de réflexion de Stacy Kennedy, toujours. If I can ask another question, what do the panel think we miss when women are obscured in art history?
Half of humanity.
All of humanity, not half.
Welcome back.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. That was a problem.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. Are we on the 10-minute break?
No, we're dealing with the last question.
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
Mais si vous
Ok.
voulez du coup finir votre réponse, parce que vous avez été interrompu au milieu de votre réponse, et puis voilà. Alice, si jamais vous vouliez poursuivre du coup.
Yes. I was saying that, well, I think I basically finished my point, but
Okay.
I was trying to express the fact that people outside of the African scene need to allow African artists to grow. But when you keep restricting the artist or the arts practitioners into one particular container, whatever it is, it makes it difficult for them to pop up. It makes it difficult for people to actually see the potential of these artists. So my point was, we need to understand that there shouldn't be a restriction on African art. And as Bernard has said, we need to advocate for the fact that there's no gender specificity of media. So that's the point that I was raising. Thank you.
Okay. Merci beaucoup, merci infiniment pour cet échange, pour vos présentations, pour vos recherches passionnantes. C'est un réel plaisir, et donc je propose qu'on fasse du coup les 10 minutes de pause.